get the hell off Duolingo. Please, I mean, 650 days. You may as well, honestly, have not done anything as far as I'm concerned. And the evidence is simply the fact that you've been doing it for 650 days and still feel frustrated. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the StoryLearning podcast. Let's get right into today's question that comes from Skeptophilia 1509. And Skeptophilia says, I need some advice. I'd always wanted to learn Japanese. I've been fascinated with the culture since I was a kid. I've already got a very good background in languages, raised bilingual English and French, an MA in linguistics, a master's in linguistics, and done some research for the MA on Scandinavian languages. So I decided to sign up for Duolingo Japanese. I've been at it for a year and a half, and I'm ready to admit defeat. Between 3 different written forms, the different grammar, how incredibly contextual the language is, I feel like I'm spinning my wheels despite working on it steadily, and the Skeptophilia is on a 650-day streak, which I believe is referring to Duolingo. I'm willing to give your system a shot, but do I even have a prayer? I feel like I still barely know any kanji, so I can't really read pretty much anything. It's gotten to be an intense frustration rather than something I'm enjoying or looking forward to. What do? Do I keep on? Do I switch to a different language? And then a little bit about some interest in some different languages out there. Do you have any advice for a frustrated language learner? I really like this question. I've got so much to say about this. And I'm looking forward to answering this. And look, Skeptophilia, the first thing I want you to do is take a month off, right? I want you to stop. I want you to get the hell off Duolingo and just stop for a month, walk away. I remember many times in different languages that I've learned, for whatever reason, I've taken a month off study because I've been on holiday or whatever. And I've come back after a month and I speak better than I did before the break, right? And this happens because of something that's known as the focus mode and the diffuse mode. Okay, and Barbara Oakley, who's been on the podcast before, talks about this. She popularized this in her Learning How to Learn course, which is the most, I think it was the highest attended online course of all time. Anyway, the concept here is that the focus mode is 2 different types of our brains, right? We have a focus mode when we're looking at something in detail, so study, textbooks and things like that. And the diffuse mode, which is where you're off doing something completely different and your brain continues forming connections in the background, right? Now, the best results from any kind of learning come from combining them. And this is why rest and time off is so important. So if you've been on a 650-day streak, I want you to stop. Give yourself a break. Take a month off, enjoy it, go and play golf or something, and just don't think about it. And then when you come back after a month, I guarantee you're going to feel slightly different about it. So that's the first thing. The one thing you could do whilst you're on this break is continue some immersion of some kind, right? So I don't know if you do much listening in Japanese, but there are some fantastic Japanese podcasts out there, Japanese TV shows and movies. I've put together a big list of my favorites, podcasts, movies, TV shows in Japanese and 14 other languages as well. I can get that in the link in the description. That will just give you some stuff that's been recommended by me and my team at StoryLearning as stuff that's not only really, really interesting and fun, but also really good for language learning. So you could have some of that stuff on in the background, but basically take a month off any kind of study. Now, we need to talk about Japanese, all right? So let me give you some truth bombs here because I think this is useful. So I learned Japanese as my 5th foreign language after I had learned Spanish, French, Portuguese, English, obviously. And I thought I was some kind of language genius after I had learned a bunch of Romance languages. Went to Japan and my whole world was turned upside down when I realized it's a completely different world, right? As you've discovered. I mean, you've covered a lot of the very interesting elements of Japanese. You've got the 3 different written forms. The grammar is completely different concept. The language is very, very contextual. A lot of stuff is not really said. And so what this means is that you cannot study Japanese in this linear way like you could with a Romance language, right? If you started learning Spanish or Italian now, you'd have an easy time of it, right? Because you already speak English and French, you have some knowledge of some Scandinavian languages, you would find another Romance language dead easy. But where's the fun in that? Look, with a language like Japanese, it's very different from what you know. The main thing you've got to keep in mind is it's a language that you have to get used to, not study, all right? Whenever people tell me they've been doing a lot of grammar study in Japanese, I always think, no. Because you can understand this stuff logically, you can learn the grammar rules, but you've got to develop an instinct for how the grammar is being used and how meaning is put together in the language. It comes from just a lot of time spent with the language. And the reason you get frustrated is because you're trying to approach this in the same way, in this logical kind of building block way, right? Like you learn one more thing and you learn a bit and then you get a bit better. You learn a bit and you get a bit better. Not the case with Japanese. You have to do a bunch of upfront work, and then at some point when Japanese decides, like the clouds will be lifted and something will suddenly make sense, and you will have this, you will just know how to use it because you just got used to the way that meaning is constructed in Japanese. You have an MA in linguistics, and I think in many ways this actually might be impeding you because you're obviously smart, you understand language, and so for smart people like you and I mean, how humble is that? For smart people like you, I'm just dumb for the most part. But I've noticed that for smart people like you, like a language like Japanese can be very frustrating because it defies logic, right? We like to think we can study our way through different language, but you can't do it. So what this means is you've got to take a different approach, right? You can't study Japanese the way that you would study other languages. So the first thing I want you to do is just get the hell off Duolingo, please. I mean, 650 days. You may as well, honestly, have not done anything as far as I'm concerned. And the evidence is simply the fact that you've been doing it for 650 days and still feel frustrated. Like that's 3 years, right? Almost. So you mentioned, you said here, I'm willing to give your system a shot, but do you even have a presser? Now I'm going to talk about story learning, right? And lest this come across as just blatant promotion, there's a reason that I developed story learning, and it's for situations like this. Okay, so I'm going to talk about story learning and why it works, why it matters, why it helps. And story learning is essentially the polar opposite of Duolingo. From day one with story learning, you are inside a story. And it's difficult, and it's supposed to be difficult. But the whole approach is, look, if from day one you are reading stories, you're listening to stories, you're surrounded by the language, then you are taking what you might like to call the direct approach, which is that you're not trying to make it easy and sugarcoat it and give yourself like grammar McNuggets. You are instead dealing with the whole language right from day one. And yes, you're struggling a little bit on day one, but guess what? When you struggle with the real thing, you eventually get used to the real thing. And that way, by the time you've finished one of our story learning courses, for example, you have read and listened to an entire story in Japanese. And you ain't never gonna do that if you are using Duolingo or frankly any other program out there, because rather than building everything from the ground up and trying to learn grammar and vocabulary and piece it all together to create meaning, because that doesn't work in Japanese. Instead, by taking the approach that we take at story learning, you are surrounding yourself in the real thing from the beginning, and then you will not feel progress from one day to the next or 1 week to the next. But by the time you've finished the whole thing, you will notice that things have unlocked, clouds have been lifted, you have a different feeling, a different level of understanding about how to approach the language, because from the beginning, you have been immersing yourself in the actual language. Now, you can do this by yourself as well. The challenge, though, is finding material. And the reason that it's often useful to sign up to a structured program that someone else has created is that that creator has done the work of already, selecting and creating the material so that it can be studied by you at a beginner level. Most people who are beginners in a language, if they have to go out and select their own material and piece together their own curriculum, they're not going to be able to do it, or they're going to do a very poor job of it, which is why it doesn't have to be story learning. It can be anyone else, but someone who's done the work of putting together that curriculum, designing the material. It's not free, but what you gain in efficiency ultimately is well worth it when you consider that you can spend 650 days spinning your wheels on Duolingo. Okay, well, over the course of 90 days with a story-based or an immersion-based or an input-based method, it's going to change your entire relationship with Japanese. Now, objections. How do you read a story when you're a beginner? You don't have to worry about that, because inside our method, what we do is we give you the story to listen to, but then the tuition in the program then explains it to you, right? Where this differs from a regular program is that, so, you know, regular textbook says, here are the rules, here are the words, learn them, and then we'll go and use it somewhere. With story learning, it's like, here's the story, read the story, listen to the story, immerse yourself in it, and then we'll come and explain to you what you've been reading and listening, right? So that is the most natural way around of doing it. So the reason that our programs exist is that we've designed them for beginners. Now, I understand, Skeptically, you're not a complete beginner. So it may be that, I don't know whether level 1 or level 2 of our program would be the right one for you, but you know, either way, it sounds like it might be useful to start with level 1, just so that we don't make it too difficult and we smooth the way with your frustration a little bit there. And you know, when it comes to the reading, so you say you barely know any kanji. I'm going to guess here that you've learned hiragana and katakana. If you haven't, let's fix that right now. I mean, again, in our programs, we teach them, right? But you can do that by yourself quite easily. You can learn hiragana and katakana in a weekend. Like, there's no reason to delay that, right? And then as for the kanji, you know, you've been learning for over 2 years now. If you barely know any kanji, that's because you haven't studied it, right? Let's just call a spade a spade. You can learn a good number of kanji in 2 years. So I get the impression here, Skeptophilia 1509, that what you really need to do is to kind of just engage with the language in a way that is just more user-friendly and that is less atomistic and more holistic, to use some terminology that you will understand as an MA in linguistics, right? And what you're describing here is precisely why I've designed our story learning programs the way that we have. So I'll put a link down below to our Japanese programs at StoryLearning for those who are interested, alongside my best binge-worthy resources for Japanese and other languages. But Skeptophilia, the one thing I want you to do right now is take a month off. Please, for your own sake, stop, take a month off, forget your Duolingo streak, just be kind to yourself for a while. And I promise you, when you come back to it, you're going to have a different relationship with it. But I need you to take that time off, and I need you to then come back to studying the language with a more holistic approach, because that's the only way you're going to make Japanese work for you. So there we go. I hope that was useful, and I'll see you back in the next episode of the Story Learning Podcast.